When most parents dream of their children's future jobs, they would recommend higher-level jobs such as doctors or judges, or at least a civil servant called a stable iron rice bowl. No parent wants their children to go down a difficult path. However, his situation was a little different from most. His mother had always believed that he had the qualities of a shaman, and urged him to pursue that path for his own protection. She warned him that if he didn't, he could end up in big trouble one day. Those words stayed with him, causing him to seriously consider his options and weigh the potential consequences of ignoring his mother's advice. Following this, his mother made him do all sorts of religious practices, including reciting poetry, performing magic, and participating in bizarre rituals that he had never even heard of. However, he was unable to fully embrace these practices, as he already had a clear vision of what he wanted to pursue in life. Instead, he devoted himself to his studies and worked hard to achieve his goals. 10 years had passed since then. He had become a member of society. However, tragedy struck when he died in a traffic accident, leaving him speechless. He couldn't believe that the trouble his mother had warned him about had actually befallen him. But what was even more surprising was the fact that he was reborn into a new life, in this new existence. He finally understood that everything his mother had told him was true. He realized that people often struggle to understand things that they have not personally experienced, and he had learned this lesson firsthand through his own death and rebirth. To the Empire's capital, a mechanical engineering locomotive emitting pure white steam arrived at the station, the sound of compressed steam spewing out as iron reverberated. The passengers waiting at the station got on the train one by one, and watching the scene, he took a deep breath before boarding the train. It felt like his body was becoming clearer as the fresh air seeped into his lungs. The sky was clear without clouds, and in the cold air of winter that was just coming to an end. The departure time of the train to the Exilian Empire was short. As he got on the train, the conductor spoke to him. He took the ticket out of the pocket of the frock coat he was wearing and handed it over. After receiving a courtesy greeting from the conductor, he responded with a light nod of his head. When he checked the ticket that was handed over to him, there was a number 403 written on it. In other words, it was the third room of the fourth wagon. The hallway was narrow, but long enough for only one person to walk through, and there were large gaps in the door on one side. The magic engineering train he was on was not called a luxury train for nothing. After checking the nameplate, he opened the door and entered. The moment he opened the door, he could smell the old wood. The moment he had such a futile thought, the door of room 403 creaked open as if it had been waiting. The one who came in was a well-dressed man in his mid-20s. He's tall and wears a brown frock coat similar to the one I'm wearing. There is no way the train staff would wear such clothes, so it was obvious that he was a passenger in the same room as him. The other side greeted him first, so he nodded his head slightly and accepted it. He didn't want to talk for a long time, so he responded as if he had a quiet personality. The man didn't care too much about his behavior and sat down on the opposite seat. He took out the newspaper that was placed next to the pamphlet and unfolded it. Because there are no laptops or smartphones in this world, there is nothing other than books and newspapers that can kill time. The conversation began when the man suddenly mentioned the news about the end of the war in the Utah Kingdom, which caught their mutual interest. After this topic arose, the man finally introduced himself, revealing that his name was Rudiger Chelsea. Despite hailing from a fallen nobility, he had recently become a professor at Exilian's Empire Academy, where he was tasked with teaching second-year students. As they discussed the Utah Civil War, Rudiger suddenly recalled hearing rumors that the key figure responsible for the princess's faction's victory was not a skilled mage or a high-ranking knight, but a wandering mercenary named Machiavelli. To Rudiger's surprise, Gerard was not taken aback by this information, as he already knew that it was more than just a mere rumor. In fact, Gerard himself was once known as Machiavelli, the wandering mercenary who had traversed the world in search of a mysterious object. Gerard suddenly felt something wrong. A huge explosion shook the train wildly. The cabin shook, and the train running on the railroad staggered sideways. He held onto the handle of the chair strongly to balance his body. Rudiger asked Gerard if it was the engine that exploded. However, the train's engine is protected by magic, so it's impossible unless there is an ambush. The two thinks it must be a robbery aimed at the wealthy merchants or nobles that's in the train. It's because Gerard is a commoner in his 40s, who has only a lot of money, and this guy who became an academy teacher in his mid-20s would fight better. Rudiger took out a small wooden staff in his right hand and held it up. The two of them opened the door to the room and looked at the corridor of the fourth vehicle. It was empty. They think the passengers were waiting quietly in the safe rooms now. But that's not a good decision since the breached exterior was protected by the same magic. The cabins are no longer safe. At that moment, a man broke the window in the hallway. The snow he had not brushed from his shoulder flew down, sensing their presence. The man turned his head and stared at them. There was a lot of blood in those eyes. Rudiger resorted to using magic to knock the man unconscious, giving him a chance to interrogate him about the attack on the train. However, the man refused to provide any answers and instead cruelly laughed at them. To make matters worse, he then activated a bomb that he had attached to his body, opting to self-destruct rather than give Rudiger the information he sought. The bomb caused a massive explosion that damaged the carriage from the inside out. After the blast, Gerard frantically searched for Rudiger, but he was nowhere to be seen. Concerned that his friend may have been caught in the explosion, Gerard examined his own expensive tailored suit and mask, which had also sustained damage. He couldn't help but wonder why he always seemed to find himself caught up in dangerous incidents like this one. Theirs wasn't a special reason. He decided to go under the name Machiavelli. He just chose a famous name he remembered in his previous life, because he was always traveling across the world and got caught up in a lot of bad business. He had to change his identity constantly. It was truly a difficult day. He was getting unwanted attention when he needed to hide his identity. Thankfully, the princess and her faction were caught up in their triumph. He took advantage while they lowered their guard, disguised himself, then took the arcane punk train heading Lindenborough. However, he couldn't help but wonder why dangerous incidents always seemed to happen whenever he was present. "God bless you, Rudiger," Gerard exclaimed, dismayed that an accident had occurred on such a day. The explosion, which had occurred while the train was also jolted with electricity, was not the work of common robbers. Instead, Gerard speculated that the perpetrators were suicidal psychopaths, and that their true objective may have been to take over the entire train, rather than just rob it of its valuables. A train staff member suddenly appeared and asked Gerard what had happened. Gerard replied that the train had been attacked by armed robbers and it appeared they were targeting the first carriage. He suggested it would be wise for them to stay back. The train staff member agreed and began evacuating the other passengers to the back of the train, urging Gerard to join them as well. However, Gerard suddenly grabbed the train staff and said, "Do you really think your pathetic acting would work on me?" He explained that armed robbers don't just randomly assault trains going at full speed in the middle of nowhere, and that the protective spells around the train just happened to go down as well, which is a ridiculously hard feat to pull off without any inside operation. The man on the train attempted to pull out a knife hidden in his sleeve, but Gerard was quick to react and grabbed his wrist. He demanded to know who the man and his accomplices were, as well as what their objective was. However, the train staff still refused to speak and remained silent. Despite this, Gerard thought he heard something familiar and suspected that he knew what was going on. Suddenly, he heard the sound of gunfire, and the train staff he had been holding was instantly killed. Gerard was certain that he had not given the man any chance to communicate anything at all, and he felt that this attack had been carefully planned. Gerard stood up, unfazed by the robbers' attempts to kill him. He told them that they couldn't kill him and to quit dreaming. However, the robbers were shocked when they fired another round of gunshots at Gerard, only to find that their guns were not working. The robbers quickly deduced that Gerard must be a Mitch, since their guns were not working on him. However, to Gerard's surprise, one of the robbers was also a Mitch, and was able to neutralize his magic. Gerard was caught off guard and couldn't defend himself. As the robbers approached him with their weapons drawn, one of the robbers threatened Gerard to give up and remain still, offering him a peaceful death. However, the enemy mage sensed that Gerard was not an ordinary mage, but perhaps a rank for mage like himself, since he did not recognize Gerard's face. Meanwhile, Gerard's mind was racing as he assessed the situation. It had already been about 10 minutes since the explosion, and he knew it would take a long time to get out of the arid mountain range. Waiting for reinforcements was not an option, so he made the decision to jump off the train. The robbers frantically checked the side of the train where Gerard had jumped, but they saw nothing. They assumed he had fled in fear. But little did they know that Gerard had climbed onto the roof of the train. As he made his sudden move, the robbers panicked and wondered how he got up there. They speculated that he must have used fly magic to get onto the roof. The enemy mage then ordered a few of his men to stay behind, and the rest to proceed to the first carriage. He knew that ordinary people would not pose much of a threat against a mage. They started shooting at the roof of the train, hoping to hit Gerard. However, Gerard quickly made his way to the back of the train, planning to set a trap for any robbers who might follow him. Sure enough, when the robbers reached the door, the trap was triggered and the explosion went off, causing chaos and confusion among the attackers. The enemy mage is astonished by what has just happened, asking himself how it was possible. Gerard is completely different from any mage he has encountered in the past. He brings a level of efficiency and effectiveness that is unparalleled. He seems more like a hunter or a mercenary than a mage. However, as soon as the robbers realized what had happened, Gerard had already separated the train carriages. He knew there was nothing to gain by facing the robbers, so he took the smart decision to cut off the carriage and leave them behind. It was too late for the robbers to chase after him now. As the enemy mage threatened Gerard, he sensed a surge of magical energy from the back of the carriage. To their surprise, they saw Gerard casting a spell that pointed directly at them. It was too late for them to defend themselves, and they could only wonder if it was another trap. Gerard cast his magic spell into the group of robbers, expecting that it was over, but to his surprise, the enemy mage was still standing and questioned him why he would kill them when they are only patriots fighting for the world. However, Gerard didn't care because they wanted to kill him first, and had no right to complain about the outcome. In truth, Gerard had wanted to run at first, but the robbers had seen his face, leaving him with no other choice but to fight back. As Gerard was conversing with the enemy mage, suddenly, there was a strike from behind that knocked him out. To his surprise, the Cold Steel Knighthood had arrived on the scene. Meanwhile, in another carriage of the train, the remaining members of the Cold Steel Knighthood were engaged in a fierce battle with the remaining train robbers. The robbers were surprised to see the Cold Steel Knighthood members using flying magic to catch up with the train despite the bad weather. In a moment of swift action, they managed to clear the carriage that had been taken hostage. The Cold Steel Knighthood members reported to the vice captain that they had successfully cleared the remaining carriages from the robbers. The vice captain praised her team for their exceptional work and ordered them to escort the passengers safely to the next station. At Letherbelk station, the vice captain approached Gerard and asked him if he was injured during the train robbery. Gerard calmly replied that he was unharmed, thanks to the Cold Steel Knighthood's assistance. As the vice captain, Veronica Deville, introduced herself to Gerard, but they were interrupted by an officer from the Letherbelk Metropolitan Police Agency. During their conversation, the officer expressed his gratitude towards the knights for their hard work. However, he also mentioned that there was something odd about the attack on the train. At the border of the arid mountain range, he noted that the robbers were able to take over the train far too quickly and with ease, even with the involvement of a mage. He suspected that there might be a bigger plot behind this attack. As the officers continued to investigate the train attack, they speculate that there may have been an inside job involved. The vice captain, Veronica Deville, agrees with the officers' suspicions and nods in agreement. As a result, the officers begin to interview the passengers to ensure they can properly identify themselves before being released from the station. Veronica assured Gerard that as long as he answered the police's questions truthfully, everything would be fine. However, Gerard knew that this would be a challenge, as he had been traveling incognito and had no identification on him. There was no issue with Gerard's identity, as he had purchased his ticket through the usual methods, and when he boarded the train, he did so with pride and confidence. The real problem with Gerard's situation is not his identity. The issue at hand is Gerard's appearance, which doesn't match his supposed age of being in his mid-40s. If he is investigated, it won't take long for his true identity to be revealed. and he will likely face severe punishment or torture. The presence of numerous police officers and knights outside also makes it impossible for him to escape. Moreover, the vice captain's seemingly friendly demeanor could quickly turn harsh if Gerard is found to be suspicious. The police officer began the process of confirming Gerard's identity by asking him to produce his train ticket and cross-referencing it with the list of passengers for cabin number 403. According to the list, there were 2 passengers in that cabin: Rudiger Chelsea, a male in his mid-20s, and Gerard, a male in his mid-40s. The officer then proceeded to ask Gerard some questions to verify his identity. They first asked Gerard about the whereabouts of the other person with whom he shared the cabin. Gerard calmly replied that due to the explosion, the other person was swept away when the train was passing through the arid mountain range and fell off the cliff. The officer's suspicious gaze bore into Gerard's as he explained what had happened to his cabin mate. However, before the officer could press further, the vice captain interrupted the interrogation. She explained to the officer that Gerard had actually been in the midst of battling the robbers when they arrived on the scene. With this information, the officer quickly realized that Gerard wasn't a suspect at all and apologized for the misunderstanding. Suddenly, Gerard's heart raced as the officer called him by a different name, Rudiger. Confused, Gerard tried to correct the officer, but the officer showed him the list of passengers that included both Gerard and a Rudiger Chelsea, who was assigned to Thierry Academy as a professor. Realizing the opportunity, Gerard quickly adopted the identity of Rudiger Chelsea, hoping to use it to his advantage in the future. Outside the train station, the officer once again apologized to Rudiger for the misunderstanding and offered to escort him all the way to Thierry. However, Rudiger politely declined the offer, citing his preference to travel alone due to personal matters he needed to attend to. He assured the officer that he could manage on his own and thanked him and the vice captain for their assistance. After bidding farewell to the officers, Rudiger left the station and made his way towards Thierry Academy. As he walked, he couldn't help but replay the conversation he had with Veronica in his head. He was struck by her confidence and sense of purpose, and he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. He wondered if they would indeed meet again in the future, as she had suggested. And he couldn't help but think about the strange turn of events that had led him to assume the identity of Rudiger Chelsea. Thanks to him, Gerard survived, and he is relieved that the photography techniques in this world are not advanced enough to easily differentiate between Sir Rudiger and himself based on a photo. While lost in his thoughts, he realized that he had successfully overcome the crisis, and he felt relieved. However, he knew that he needed to hide for a while and create a new identity to avoid being caught in the future. However, as he was lost in thought, someone called out to him using the name Rudiger. It was Wilfred, one of the employees at Thierry Academy. He had come to check on Rudiger due to concerns after hearing about the train attack. Wilfred's relief at seeing Rudiger safe was evident on his face. He quickly greeted him and offered to escort him to Thierry Academy. Rudiger, feeling grateful for Wilfred's concern, accepted the offer and got in the carriage. As they approached the academy, Rudiger couldn't help but feel that he was in big trouble. The fact that someone had been sent to pick him up made him uneasy. But what made him more uneasy was the realization that Wilfred was not an ordinary employee of the academy. With his toned physique and stealthy approach, Rudiger deduced that Wilfred was probably a knight. If he tried to make any sudden moves, it might raise suspicion and lead to him being followed. So, for the time being, he decides to play it safe and stick to his current plan. Perhaps the current situation might even prove to be safer for him in the long run. In his mind, Rudiger thought that as long as Gerard was declared dead, he was like a ghost in this country. Nobody would recognize him, and he could go unnoticed no matter where he went. While being dragged or disappearing might raise suspicions, having a defined identity like he currently did was a safer option. For the time being, he will act as Rudiger Chelsea and look for an opportunity. After a while, Wilfred informed Rudiger that they had arrived at Thierry Academy. Rudiger was taken aback by the grandeur of the place. It was much larger than he had expected. Wilfred kindly offered to take care of Rudiger's luggage, allowing him to focus on his meeting with the Chancellor. Rudiger arrived at the Chancellor's office and promptly introduced himself, stating that he was there because the Chancellor was looking for him. Upon entering, He found himself facing Theron's chancellor, Eliza Willow, with a smile. She also introduced herself as Theron's chancellor.